Over here, what we have is a map of a couple of different dynamics in human interactions that make a tremendous difference in the quality of that interaction. And what we're looking at is the range between love, particularly transcendent love, empathy, and sociopathic behavior. So the first map to be aware of is the brain. So we have the reptilian brain, which is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn protocol to deal with a traumatizing and frightening world. The reptilian brain is designed to survive. We have the rational brain, which is a vehicle for all of the different brains. The survival reptilian brain relies on the rational brain for pattern recognition, for future prediction, in order to more effectively combat a perceived threatening environment. The rational brain is the pattern analyzer. And the whole purpose of all pattern analysis is to more successfully predict the future. Because if you can tell that a bus driving towards you is going to kill you because you can understand momentum, then you can jump out of the way and your survival odds go up. Then we have the empathic brain, which is the brain that allows us to move beyond the solely self-centered narcissistic state of mind of the child or adolescent to understand and empathize with being another human being. And finally, we have the transcendent brain, which is the lens through which we experience the ecological nature of reality and our innate unity, our innate oneness with our ecology, with something bigger than ourselves. So, depending on which brain we're coming from as we relate to ourselves and other people, most of our experience is determined. If it's one of transcendent love or fear of pain in a fight, flight, freeze, please dynamic. That's all about the brain. And the brain is all about the ecology, the surrounding, primarily the cultural environment. Because when there is an emotionally literate, a psychologically literate, a traumatically literate, balanced culture between the energy of yin and femininity and yang and masculinity, you have high levels of competence, you have low levels of trauma, and an infant is naturally born very near the transcendent brain. An infant is born in the sense of unconditional love and gradually moves down into empathy, the unconditional yes to what is the learning the language of the parent, the diet of the culture, etc. And then moves down into rationality with time as the cult or culture teaches the child, this is this, 2 + 2 = 4. These are patterns. This is called a table. The rational brain emerges with language and distinction. And if the child is traumatized repeatedly during this process, it will deteriorate. It will regress to the 200-million-year-old crocodile brain of the reptilian brain. and as a reptile will respond to a frightening, overwhelming, and incompetent cult and environment with fight, flight, freeze, and please. Fight anything that's smaller, run from anything that's bigger, freeze when neither of those two options are available, and look for someone who has power in the cult hierarchy and try to please them, make oneself indispensable to that person so that they will, out of a narcissistic self-centeredness, take care of you in, for the child, a dependent state. And this ties in with the next distinction, which is between independent and dependent. Because when you have a relationship that is descending towards trauma and abuse, towards violation, you have this kind of general continuum of attunement and violation. When you have an independent relationship between two independent adults, meaning both adults have various sources for meeting their human needs to survive, feel secure, experience love and belonging, develop self-esteem, learn what their gifts are and develop those gifts, bring those gifts abundantly into the world, become part of something bigger than ourselves. When a person has access to resources that allow them to independently fulfill their needs, as one person decides not to attune, but rather to violate the other person's preferences and needs, then you just dissociate from that person and independently move on. However, in a dependent relationship between a patient and a doctor, at times between a patient and a therapist, between a child and a family structure, when you have a dependent relationship, when someone depends on another in order to meet their human needs, then you don't have a dissociation and a transition to another relationship as the parent, the teacher, the therapist, the employer descends into violation. Rather, you have a codependent abuse dynamic where it becomes more and more painful. And at a certain point where the pain cannot be tolerated by the empathic and transcendent brains, they shut down and dissociate. And what's left is a pattern analyzing sociopathic and reptilian protocol that is viewing the other as the enemy. It's often referred to as a love-hate relationship, where the love is the love of the child, the love of need, or the love of the adolescent, the love of desire. But the need is of the other, and the hatred is that the other is not attuning to the child, to the adolescent, to the one in a dependent state. So there's need and there's also hatred. And one of the issues and one of the challenges is, well, reality is spherical. The most elegant shape in the multiverse is a sphere. Reality is spherical. The system with which we engage with reality is a dumbed down version. We may take the beautiful complexity of the sphere and reduce it to three components. I work, I come home, I sleep. The sphere is reduced into a triangle. Now, the more simple the system of distinctions and symbolic representations of reality, the harder the corners are. These are hard corners. One of the reasons that we have wheels on our vehicles is because although a sphere is an infinite number of lines and an infinite number of dots, precisely because of that, the angle between any one bit and another is a very gentle angle. So if you're driving on round wheels, you got a very smooth ride compared to driving on a triangle. And yet the human mind cannot grasp the complexity of an infinite number of dots, an infinite number of planes and lines. And so we tend to simplify the sphere into a triangle. And it's fine in these straight run areas, but as you pivot from here to here, the transition can be a bit rough. And again, the transition is a bit rough, and the transition is a bit rough. It's a simple system. Now, these systems through which human beings perceive and through which they engage with reality are very subjective, because when you have an infinite number of lines, an infinite number of dots composing the circle, you can do a triangle here, you can do a triangle here, you can do a triangle like this, a six-sided figure. You can make up anything you want. And as long as there is a process of roughly covering the general terrains of the sphere, you have life, you have movement forward. But what happens when this person has a triangle and this person has a shape like this? Well, as they come together, it's going to be more difficult to attune. And this is where dishonor, disrespect, and violation occur. Because if I'm ignoring, if I'm just going here, 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 then I'm dishonoring large portions of the sphere. I'm dishonoring this bit over here, 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 here. And it could be that it's unconscious. I don't have language for it. I am following cult protocol to tune it out. So it's not really forefront in my mind. But it could also be that it's not important to me right now, because balance is medicinal. We talk about health, and it comes from the same root word as the word for whole. Wholeness, health. And when we're talking about the whole, we're talking about the sphere. And families and cults as a whole tend to develop little parts of the sphere and to the exclusion of everything else, because part of the nature of identity, the illusionary creation of something that we say, this is me, and that's not me. That's an identity. And an identity is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. It's a pattern. There's a pattern to my words. And I look at those words and I say, yeah, that's me. I didn't say this, I said this. That's me, that's not me. Well, all identities, particularly cult identities, which are the root word of culture is cult, tend to also define themselves in opposition, in relationship. So this cult is over here on the probability and possibility field of cult. And this cult is here. But we're not that cult. We're not that cult. We're this cult. And in order to maintain one's identity, one has to not do certain things that don't fit into the identity, that would cause the coherence of the pattern to disintegrate. An integrated pattern is we are the ones who speak English, so we can't just start talking gibberish halfway through a sentence. I am Kikiro. This was happening and Kikiro. That's losing the coherence of the English identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being around English. So in order to hold on to my identity, I watch this media, I don't watch that media. I am the one who eats these things and does not eat those things. I am the one who speaks this way and not this way. I'm the one who walks like this and not like that. I'm the one who believes this and does not believe that. This is my identity. In order to have coherence and stability, because highly traumatized cultures create tremendous fear in the cult members of the unknown, tremendous fear of the future and the unknown, of being out of control. And the best way to be in the known and in control is to hang doggedly to a dogmatic identity that we cling to for no other reason than that's what we were before. That's who I was before. No one's going to change me. I'm this way because I was that way. And I was that way because that's the way I developed. And I developed that way because that's the way my cult thinks and feels and does things as a general rule. And even cults that are known for individual rebelliousness, then I have to rebel because I'm a member of an individualistic cult where everyone is unique. And so I have to be different because everyone in my cult has to be different. Who's somebody? And so we have this identity, but how do I know and maintain my identity? I've got to not be these other things. Now, as a result, every identity, every culture, and every ego identity, every cultural identity and ego identity, and there's a lot of overlap, is unhealthy because it's not whole. It's unbalanced because it overdevelops certain traits, but doesn't develop the counterpart. And so if one has developed one's mind and developed one's pattern analyzing ability to great extremes and becomes sick, becomes filled with dis-ease over time. And what this means is that in order to become whole, in order to become healthy, in order to heal the imbalance that comes from a self-referential identity or that is defining itself by the exclusion of everything else, we have to move to the other parts of the circle. We have to explore more of who we are and can be through other cultures, through other people, through exploring other facets of ourself. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. We can travel, we can immigrate, we can go inward, and we can do different things. We can break our identity in our current environment, which tends to be more difficult. We can also marry it if we're highly cerebral, and our medicine, which is that which balances us, because ease comes from balance. If you want to spin a top easily, it has to be a balanced top. If you want to drive a car easily, the wheels cannot be 2 feet on one side and 1 foot on the other side of the wheel. That watermelon-shaped wheel will not be easy. It will be a dis-ease experience. And going round and round in circles, reaffirming a very narrow, limited identity is not easy either. It's very painful in its dissociation from wholeness, the healing of moving towards balance. So we can marry someone who is our opposite, and there we have opposites attract. I'm very intellectual, I'm very dry, I'm very organized, I'm very competent, I'm very logical. Well, I'm very spontaneous, very emotional, very playful, very energized, and spontaneous. And the person who's always spontaneous and disorganized and follows expediency in the moment, for example, probably doesn't have any money, because those particular traits don't tend to lead towards long-term investing, which is the most reliable way to generate money. And someone who's, incredibly artistic, or in their body doing, trenches and art and this and that and the other, again, may find value in understanding another person's mind. In short, medicine for different cultures often is found in the other. One of the most healing places I've ever spent time in is Thailand. And one of the reasons is that it is diametrically opposed on a number of cultural continuums relative to the United States, where I've spent most of my time. And so when I go to Thailand, for example, I spend an average of 4 hours of quality time with a stranger every single day. When I'm in the United States, the process of getting together is very yang, very structured. I call up, I say, how about we get together this afternoon? They don't answer the phone. Or they say, call me next week. Or let's get a bite to eat in 2 weeks. And then you check in again closer to the time to cram something in. So here you have spontaneity with strangers and doing things in the moment. And then you have the opposite of that, which is cramming in time 2 weeks in advance, regardless of how you feel at the time. Because it's not about feelings, it's about the schedule. You may not feel like getting a bite, but it's in the schedule. So you have to go and get a bite because you planned it. The plan comes first, and the plan is followed because it is the plan, not because you feel like it. So the US and Thailand are on opposite extremes of a number of cultural continuums that make it medicinal, whether it's quality time or a focus on smiling and presence rather than, oh, that's an interesting idea. A focus on feelings rather than a focus on thoughts. So between the two, it becomes medicinal. It may be medicinal for a Thai person to explore some of the things in American culture. It's certainly medicinal for me to explore aspects of Thai culture. But as systems connect, the way that we compose a metaphor for reality, a heuristic model of reality, because we don't actually relate to reality directly. We relate to the idea of reality through language, through paradigms, through models that we develop. We say the work-life balance. That's a dualistic model. There's life and there's work. It doesn't make any sense. Why isn't work part of life? Why isn't life part of work? Are you alive at work? It's just the way it's been divided. You just take a line through life, say this is work, this is life. Now you have to develop, now that you've cut the world in half, you have to develop balance between those two halves. Or business and pleasure. Again, you just cut it this way. This is pleasure, this is business. You can't have pleasure when you're having business. You can't do business with, while you're seeking pleasure. But why not? These are just completely artificial distinctions. What words do is they cut up the infinite complexity and multidimensionality of reality into heuristic models through language that we then perceive reality through those models. And since most of reality doesn't fit nicely into our model, we just tune it out and narrow what we notice and pay attention to that which supports and reinforces our model, because it gives us a sense of control, which for traumatized cultures is very important, to feel like we're in control. Why? Because in traumatically illiterate cultures with high degrees of trauma and low degrees of traumatic repair, every infant, every child, every adolescent has one dominant underlying drive in mind as they go through the horror of childhood and adolescence in a sociopathic, unattuned, psychologically illiterate culture. I never want to feel that way again. Get me out of this house. Get me out of this dependent relationship on these sociopathic morons who drive me up the wall, who hurt me in every possible way, and are so dumb. They don't even realize they're doing it. They're so dumb they call it love. They call it for your own good. I mean, get me out of here. And I never want to be in the hands of some other moron again. So how do you not be in the hands of someone else? You have to be in control. How do you be in control? Well, you create a model of reality, and reality itself is much more complex than that model. So reality is knocking on the door of our model constantly, saying, what about me? What about me? What about the minority data? What about the majority data? What about the anomalous data? All the data that doesn't fit into the paradigm, that doesn't fit into the status quo, that doesn't support the predominant belief. What about that data? If you're Christian and you believe that Christians are good and Muslims are bad, what do you do with the data about all of the sociopathic tendencies in yourself, in your family, and in other people who are Christians? See, because it doesn't fit the model. You've got to throw that data out and say, get out of here. You're not reinforcing my dogma. And so I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk about you. I don't want to see you. And then what do you do with all the data about the kind warmth towards travelers or strangers of Muslims? I don't want to deal with that either. Muslims are bad. Christians are good. I'm just not going to travel to any Muslim countries. That'll help me stay in touch with my dogma, my model of reality that so nice and neat. It just is, very limited. And I will come up with, lots of rationality and excuses for why this and that Christian are, atrocious human beings and behaving, incestuous. I'm going to just come up with a story, why my priest who incestuously abuses children, is fine, or what. We're just not going to talk about that because it doesn't fit the model. And, in this way, we maintain a nice, pretty version of a dumbed down version of reality that we can support by selectively focusing on evidence and denying other evidence, which is pretty easy to do because the body perceives at least 50% more data than the mind can process. So our eyes right now are seeing all kinds of things in the room. We're just not paying attention to what those are. We're focusing here. And so with that focus, we focus on the things that affirm our identity, our cult identity, and our version of reality. Now, we have our identity, our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And everyone else has their identity, their pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And generally speaking, we feel comfortable when our pattern is coherent. And what we mean by that is I have a belief that people are bad. I look on the news. I say, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad. Then I call my family and I say, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad. Then I look at myself and I say, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad. And I feel like, okay, I'm at peace with my belief. I'm in integrity. I believe that people are bad, and I look at that. And I ignore the children playing next door and the neighbor who brought me an apple and this, because that's just something. Maybe they're doing a performance, or it's not who they really are. That's a wonderful thing. You can, someone can be nice for 20 years, but then you discover that 20 years ago they killed someone. And you say, now I know who you really are. Not who you've been for the last 20 years, but what you did at one moment in time. You are a murderer. Are you also a breather? Are you also an eater? Are you also a Christianer? Whatever. But in other words, just by saying that we get to decide what's real and what isn't. And what we tend to do with that one is we take the worst thing about someone. They seemed like a nice person, but did you see him yelling at his wife or do this? That's not a nice person. Now we know who he really is, or who she really is, meaning sometimes they're nice. In fact, most of the time they're nice, but we caught one glimpse of one time when they weren't nice, as we defined nice, and then that's who they become, which mathematically doesn't make any sense, because if you said that what is real is what happens most of the time, then maybe you've caught, 1%, a 1% snippet, and you're devaluing the other 99% of data to exaggerate the 1%. Well, that's not good mathematics. That's not good accounting. If you look at a business and it's making $100,000 a year of profit, of net profit, but it has $10,000 of expenses, you don't just blow the $10,000 of expenses into $200,000 by just making it bigger and bigger and then say that's who you really are. No, who you really are is a business with $100,000 in profit and $10,000 in expenses. That's the actual scale relationship. Who you are is friendly 9 days out of 10, and very grumpy and hostile the other 1 day out of 10 or whatever. And so you're 9/10 nice and 1/10 hostile. That's the actual mathematics, but it's, that's one of the ways that we get to make the realities we want is, we say, now we know who you really are. And we just say, focus on whatever bit, could be a tiny little bit in someone. And now they're that because we said so, and we get to make up the rules. But it's important to just realize how much we do that. We're the one that sets the paradigm. We're the one that sets the belief. The paradigm and the belief set a filter. And only stuff that can get through the filter can get in. So if we set up a grid like this, if something wants to come in here, it's blocked by the filter. It can get in this little hole here, but what if it's a bit of anomalous data that doesn't fit in there? Our grid, our paradigm and our beliefs, plus our choice to divert attention, not, and ignore it and rationalize, means that all kinds of data that's all around us doesn't get to come in because it doesn't get through the filter of a paradigm, of a belief, of a cult norm. And so it just doesn't exist for us. It exists, but not for us. And this is a very important reality creation mechanism. Now, everyone has their system, everyone has their identity, and people tend to be clinging quite desperately to their identity because it's familiar. And having clung to it, the clinging too tightly to our identity means we cannot honor, we cannot respect, we cannot adjust and attune to the other's identity. And we don't want to attune to their identity because that takes us into the unknown. And every time our identity changes, our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, every time that changes, then the world we create changes with it. As my pattern of thinking changes, my pattern of feeling changes. As my pattern of feeling changes, my sense of who I am changes. As my sense of who I am changes, the world changes. And that's what I'm trying to control as a traumatized person committed to never being out of control again, because I never want to feel that way again. Because helpless trauma as a child and infant in a psychologically illiterate cult is among the most horrific human experiences imaginable. And if you're committed primarily out of fear of that pain repeating itself to not changing, to not going into the unknown, then we can't allow our identity to change. So then we cannot attune to another person and their identity. Because it might be very interesting to, oh, you believe this, you believe that, you do this, you do that, you eat these things, you don't eat these things. How very fascinating. Must work for you. You've been doing it for 30 years. How can I attune to that? How can I respond to that and make space for you to occupy that identity? It's like, no, I'm losing myself. I'm losing myself. We're watching this strange TV stuff and I'm hearing these words. No, that's not who I am. I'm this. It's the fear of change because it's the fear of loss of control, which comes with change. Because I never want to feel that way again, which is predicated to parents who will not change their identity to attune to their children because they're afraid of change, because they're afraid of feeling. So particularly in a dependent relationship, because most of these patterns start in infancy and childhood, as life grows and the parent refuses to attune to the child, it reaches a pain threshold. When that happens, the empathic and the transcendent brain shut down. Now we've got a rational reptilian brain who's trying to survive the pain in a numb, dissociated, and traumatic state, trying to figure out what will work. And that's when, for example, pain can get so intense that the trauma survivor identifies, defines themselves through the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. That is the trauma. That is the reliving of the trauma. It's called PTSD, where you relive the trauma as an identity because it was a force, because it was a pattern of energy that shattered the identity. And because it feels too helpless to try and put oneself back together again, knowing that there's something bigger that can shatter it. But if we are the trauma, if we are the traumatic event, if we identify with it, then we can go through this whole process of forming the traumatic identity, the PTSD. And now nobody can take it away from us because it's the biggest, most painful event that's ever happened to us. And we can just remember it and relive it and re-feel it. And now we have a new, more solid identity. It's very painful, but it's very strong. It's very solid. It's just the most painful events in our lives. And so we shift identity. And nobody can take it away from us because all we have to do is remember again the traumatic event. And we're right there in the pain and the fear of that event. So a couple of kind of key points here. One is that this whole dynamic of pain unravels with psychological literacy and traumatic literacy and traumatic repair. Because then you have high degrees of attunement, you have low degrees of violation, and you have higher degrees of curiosity, flexibility, and grace. Another is just the humility and understanding that every person develops a heuristic model of reality that is a dumbed down version of reality that is not reality. That reality is more complex than our language gives us the ability to perceive. Another focus is moving from dependency in a child and adolescent type relationship with an abusive partner or parent or teacher or therapist towards independence. And to be independent, we must reach and find new ways to meet our needs, to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, to develop self-esteem, to develop our personal gifts, to bring them into the world in a way that brings abundance to others and ourselves, and to become part of an ecology, part of something bigger than ourselves, to connect with something transcendent, to connect our identity with something bigger than us. And in these ways, we can move towards balance. We can move towards wholeness. We can heal the dis-ease of the reptilian sociopathic brain induced by unregulated trauma, ignorance, and fear. We can heal the crude, simplistic systems that we are stuck in with curiosity, with flexibility, with exploration, with travel, and with love for the other.